It was 3,047 in the morning when the surgeon came out to tell me my husband had made it through. I was sitting alone in a waiting room that smelled like old coffee and industrial cleaner, still wearing the jeans I'd thrown on when the ambulance called. My phone was at 11%. I hadn't eaten since lunch the day before, and when the doctor said the words, "He's stable," I just started crying into my own hands because there was no one next to me to cry into. I had texted the family group chat 4 hours earlier. My husband, Owen, had been in the serious car accident on Route 9 coming home from his brother's place. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit him on the driver's side. The paramedic who called me said it was bad. I grabbed my keys, grabbed nothing else, and drove to St. Ambrose Medical Center in the dark. Alone, shaking so hard I had to pull over twice to breathe. The message I sent to the family chat, both our families, 41 people, said Owen was in a serious accident. I'm at St. Ambrose. They're taking him into surgery now. Please pray. Then I sat down in that waiting room and I waited. I should tell you a little about Owen and me. We'd been married for 3 years at that point. We met in grad school, both of us studying occupational therapy, and we moved to Millbrook after we graduated because the cost of living made sense, and Owen had a job offer at a rehab facility there. We rented a small house on Crescent Drive. We had a dog named Biscuit. We were doing fine, not rich, not struggling, just living. My family lived about 2 hours away. Owen's family was closer, maybe 40 minutes. His parents, his brother Colt, and Colt's wife, 2 aunts and their husbands, a handful of cousins. My side was my mom, my dad, my older sister Faye and her husband, plus a scattering of aunts and uncles I saw at Thanksgiving. We were not a dramatic family. Nobody had big feuds or historic grudges that I knew of. We were ordinary people with ordinary lives. I thought that meant that when something genuinely terrible happened, they would show up. I was wrong about that. The surgery took 6 hours. Owen had internal bleeding, a fractured pelvis, and a collapsed lung. The surgical team was excellent. I know that now. I know the names of every person who worked on him that night because I sent them all thank you cards later. But at 3:47 a.m., when the surgeon found me, I had been alone in that waiting room for the entire 6 hours, except for a kind night shift nurse, named someone I've never forgotten, who brought me a granola bar around 2 a.m. and sat with me for 15 minutes. The family group chat had 41 people in it. By the time Owen was out of surgery, I had received the following responses. My mom sent a row of praying hands emojis. My dad sent a thumbs up. Owen's mom sent, "Thinking of you, sweetie. Keep us posted." His brother Colt sent, "Oh man, let us know if you need anything." His aunt, his dad's sister, a woman named Rosalind, who I had always thought of as warm and capable and the kind of person who brought casseroles, sent a single heart emoji and then nothing else. That was it. 41 people, 6 hours of surgery. And what I got was a thumbs up from my father, a row of emojis from my mother, and 4 other messages that all essentially said, "Let us know." Nobody came. Not one person drove to that hospital. Not Owen's parents, who were 40 minutes away. Not my mom. Not Faye. Nobody. I kept looking at the door. Every time it opened, I looked up. For 6 hours, I looked up at that door. Nobody walked through it for me. Owen spent 11 days in the hospital. The first 3 were in the ICU while they monitored his lung. Then he moved to a regular room and began the long, slow work of healing. His pelvis had been plated. He would need months of physical therapy. He was in significant pain for weeks. I was there every single day. I went home to shower and feed Biscuit and sleep a few hours. Then I drove back. I learned his medication schedule. I talked to the physical therapists. I sat with him while he did the exercises that made him wince and grip the bed rail. I watched the man I loved try to relearn how to shift his weight from one side to the other without his face going white. I kept sending updates to the group chat, not every day, every few days. Things like Owen's breathing better, the chest tube came out, or he stood up for the first time today with the PT, it went well. I sent those updates because I thought people wanted to know. I thought they were waiting to hear. What I got back was a lot of "so glad to hear it" and prayers, and the occasional heart react on the message itself. His Aunt Rosalind, the casserole woman, the warm one, sent me a DM on day 4. She said, "Honey, we've been so worried. How are you holding up? You must be exhausted. Owen is lucky to have you." Then she sent a photo of the flower arrangement she'd ordered to be delivered to Owen's room. $40 flower arrangement from FTD. She lived 38 minutes away. I stared at that message for a long time. I didn't know what to say. I said, "Thank you. The flowers are beautiful." I put my phone face down on the hospital tray table, and I sat there and I stared at the wall for a while. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't look like loneliness from the outside. When someone sends you flowers, when someone texts to check in, when people are technically doing something, there's no obvious crime to point to. But you feel it. You're sitting in a hospital room, watching your husband breathe through the night, and the aloneness of it presses on your chest like something physical, and you can't even explain why you're crying because technically people care. Technically people are sending emojis. Technically nobody did anything wrong. Except they did. They just did it quietly and with heart reacts. Owen came home on a Tuesday. I had set up the downstairs bedroom because he couldn't do stairs yet. I'd rented a shower chair and a toilet riser and a walker. I had reorganized my entire remote work schedule to be his primary caregiver for the foreseeable future, which my employer was decent about, thankfully. His parents came to see him the first Saturday he was home. That was almost 3 weeks after the accident. They brought a lasagna and stayed for 2 hours. His mom cried when she saw him. His dad shook his hand and patted his shoulder. I stood in my own kitchen and smiled and offered them coffee and thought about all those nights in the waiting room. My parents came the following weekend. Same thing. Food, hugs, 2 hours, gone. My mom said, "We would have come sooner, but we didn't want to overwhelm you." I nodded. I said, "Of course I understand." I didn't say anything else. But something had shifted in me that I couldn't unshift. I had learned something about my family during those 11 days, and I couldn't unlearn it. I knew now, with the kind of bone-deep certainty you only get from actual experience, what I was worth to them in a crisis. Not much. Not enough to drive 40 minutes. Not enough to sit in a waiting room at 4 a.m. I would have done it for any of them. That was the part that kept eating at me. If my mother had called me and said I'm in the hospital, it's bad, I would have been in my car before she finished the sentence. I would have slept in a plastic chair for a week. I would have brought food and done laundry and asked the nurses questions and stayed. I know I would have. I know it without any doubt. And somehow they must have known I would have done that too. And they still didn't come. About 5 weeks after Owen came home, I found out through my cousin, who had heard through another cousin, that Rosalind had been telling people a version of events that explained why nobody showed up. The version she was telling was this: that I had specifically asked people not to come to the hospital because I was overwhelmed and not handling things well emotionally, and that the family had respected my wishes and stayed away out of kindness. I read that in a text from my cousin Petra, who had heard it from her mom, and my first thought was that I must have misread it. I read it again, and then a third time. I had never said that. I had never sent any message asking people not to come. I had sent "please pray" and then updates for 11 days. I had not once asked anyone to stay away. I didn't even know where Rosalind would have gotten that from, unless she had simply invented it from nothing to cover the fact that she sent flowers instead of herself. Owen was asleep in the downstairs bedroom. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open and my coffee going cold, and I just sat there for a long time with my cousin's text on my phone. I felt something very cold and very quiet settle into me. Not rage exactly, something more like recognition. Like a puzzle piece fitting into a spot you've been staring at for weeks without knowing it was missing. Rosalind had told a story where she and the rest of the family were the good guys, the respectful ones, the ones who honored my wishes. And I was the one who had asked to be left alone. It made the $40 flower arrangement make sense. It gave the thumbs up emoji a narrative. It turned 6 hours of an empty waiting room into something that was actually my fault. I didn't say anything to anyone for a few days. I thought about how to handle it. I talked to Owen about it, and he went quiet in a way that told me it landed hard. And then he said, "That is unbelievable." I talked to my best friend Ren, who had actually driven 2 hours to the hospital on day 3 of Owen's stay and sat with me for most of a Saturday, and she said, You need to say something. You can't let that stand. The problem was that the story had been circulating for who knows how long. People had accepted it. People had filed it away as the explanation. Any pushback for me would look defensive, and I knew how that worked. I had seen it in other families, other situations. The person who says that's not true always looks like the problem. I needed someone else to surface it. My cousin Petra is a lot of things, but she is primarily thorough. She's the kind of person who takes notes during phone calls and keeps receipts from 2016 just in case. When I called her and told her the full story, the real timeline, the actual messages I had sent, the fact that there was no request to stay away, none, not once. She was quiet for a beat and then she said, "Can you screenshot everything and send it to me?" I sent her every message I had sent to the group chat, every update, every date and timestamp. I sent her the original 3 a.m. message. I sent her the DM from Rosalind about the flowers. I sent her everything and she went through it all, and then she called me back and said, "There is not a single message here where you asked people to stay away." "I know," I said. Then she went to work. Petra called Owen's mom. She called his mom's sister. She called my aunt on my dad's side, who had been in the group chat and had sent a single prayer emoji and otherwise vanished. She didn't make accusations, she just asked questions. I heard that she asked people not to come to the hospital. "Do you remember seeing that message?" "Because I'm looking at the chat right now and I can't find it." Simple questions. Gentle. Undeniable. The thing about a story that isn't true is that it collapses when you ask direct questions about it. People who had accepted the explanation without much thought suddenly couldn't find the evidence for it when someone actually looked. I must have heard that from someone. I assumed someone had told me. That kind of thing. The explanation had passed through the group like a rumor passes. Nobody really knew where it had started. They'd just received it and shelved it and moved on. Petra pinpointed Rosalind as the origin. It wasn't hard once you traced who had told whom. 3 separate people had heard it from Rosalind or from someone Rosalind had told directly. Then Petra organized a video call. Not a confrontational intervention, a family check-in, she called it, to see how Owen was doing. Rosalind joined. Owen's parents joined. My parents joined. Several others. I was there with Owen sitting next to me on the couch, his walker off to the side. Owen said a few things about his recovery. People asked questions. And then Petra said, gently, "I want to bring something up while we're all here, because I think there's been some confusion about what happened in those first few weeks." She said she had heard that the family had stayed away from the hospital because I had asked them to, and she wanted to clarify, because she had looked through the messages and hadn't been able to find that request. She asked if anyone could point her to where they'd seen it. Silence. Then Owen's mom said she thought she'd heard it from someone but couldn't remember who. Then my dad said the same. Then someone else said they'd assumed it was true. Petra said, "Rosalind, I think you might have told a few people that she asked everyone to stay away." Do you remember that conversation? And Rosalind, who had unmuted to say hello and ask about Owen's PT progress 20 minutes earlier, went very still. She said she had understood that to be the situation. She said she thought that was what was being implied. She said she was just trying to protect my privacy. Protect my privacy. I didn't say anything. Owen reached over and put his hand on my knee. Petra said, very evenly, there was no implication of that anywhere in the messages. She asked for prayers and she sent updates. That was all. And then she let the silence sit there. Rosalind said she was sorry if there had been a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. I still didn't say anything. I didn't trust what would come out if I opened my mouth, but I didn't need to say anything. Everyone on that call had just watched it happen. They had asked the question, nobody could find the evidence, the source had no real explanation, and an apology for a misunderstanding was sitting in the air where an apology for a lie should have been. The call ended not long after. Owen's mom texted me privately about an hour later and said she was sorry for not coming to the hospital. Just that. Simple, direct, no framing. I told her it had meant a lot to have that acknowledged. My dad called the next morning and said the same. Not everyone did, but some did. About 2 weeks later, Rosalind sent me a long message. She said she felt terrible about everything. She said she wanted to make it up to me. She said she had spoken to her financial planner and wanted to set aside money in a dedicated account to help with Owen's medical bills and ongoing PT costs as a gesture of support. I read it 3 times. Owen's PT was running us about $180 a session, twice a week, and insurance was covering a portion, but not all of it. We were managing, but it was real money, and the bills were stacking up in a folder on my desk that I tried not to open too often. Rosalind's offer wasn't nothing. It was real. I thought about it for 2 days. I talked to Owen, I talked to Ren, and then I wrote Rosalind back. I told her I appreciated the offer. I told her I understood it came from a genuine place, and I told her I couldn't accept it. I said that what had happened, the story she told, the way it had spread, the way it had given everyone a reason to stay home while I sat alone in that waiting room for 6 hours, couldn't be undone with money. I wasn't saying she was a bad person. I wasn't saying the offer wasn't kind. I was saying that if I accepted it, something in me would remain tangled up with her in a way I needed to untangle. I needed the account between us to be closed, not balanced. She didn't respond for 3 days. Then she sent, "I understand. I hope you can forgive me someday." I haven't responded to that. I might someday. I don't know. Owen finished his formal PT course 8 months after the accident. He still has some stiffness on his left side when it's cold, and probably always will. He walks with a slight unevenness that most people don't notice, but I always do. He went back to work part-time at month 4 and full-time at month 7, and the day he drove himself to work for the first time, I sat in the driveway after he left and cried for about 10 minutes, not out of sadness, but out of something I didn't have a word for. Relief, probably, or gratitude, or just the release of all that held breath. Biscuit still sleeps on his feet. My relationship with my family is different now. Not gone, not cut off. We still talk. We still see each other at holidays. But I'm different in those rooms. I know something I didn't know before about what I can expect, and knowing it means I've adjusted what I give, quietly, without drama. I don't hate them. I'm not burning with resentment. I'm just realistic, and realism is a kind of protection. Owen's parents have been better since the video call. Not transformed. People don't transform, but better. His mom checks in more. His dad asked Owen about PT once in a way that sounded like he actually wanted to know the answer. Small things. I noticed them. Petra and I are closer than we've ever been. She drove 90 minutes to have lunch with me last spring, and we sat on the patio of a place downtown and split a bottle of wine and talked for 3 hours, and at some point she said, "I just couldn't let it stand." And I said, "I know," and that was the whole thing. That was all it needed to be. Rosalind is at family events. We are cordial. I smile at her across the table, and she smiles back, and we both know what we know, and that's where it stays. As for the group chat, I'm still in it. I see the birthday messages and the vacation photos and the memes Owen's uncle forwards from 2019. I don't post much anymore. I read it differently now. I see it for what it is, a place where the family performs togetherness. I don't think that's nothing. I just know now that it's not the same as togetherness itself. Togetherness is who shows up at 4 a.m. in a waiting room that smells like old coffee when there's no photo op in it for anyone, when you get nothing in return except the knowledge that you were there. I know exactly who showed up for me. I can count them on one hand, and I hold those people differently now, with both hands, with everything I have. That's what 11 days in a hospital teaches you if you're paying attention. Not who loves you. People can love you and still send a thumbs up from their couch at midnight. It teaches you who shows up. And once you know the difference, you can't forget it. You carry it differently after that. Lighter in some ways, heavier in others, but clearer. Always clearer.